The Alpha King had enough gold to buy the moon, yet his son was rotting in a silk bed. 1,000 healers offered roots, prayers, and leeches. 1,000 healers failed. Then came a starving Omega with dirt under her nails, who did what gods and kings could not. It smelled like a butcher's shop, masquerading as an apothecary. The heavy scent of crushed sage, burnt lavender, and copper blood hung stagnant in the royal chambers. Ronan, Alpha King of the Iron Ridge, sat in the high-backed oak chair beside the hearth, unmoving. He watched the man at the foot of the bed frantically shove glass vials and dried roots into a leather satchel. Master Alden, the 1,000th healer, or perhaps the 999th. Ronan had stopped counting when the first winter snows hardened into ice. Alden's hands shook violently. A small clay jar slipped from his sweaty fingers, shattering on the polished stone floor. Dark, viscous liquid pooled in the grout lines. "Forgive me, my king," Alden stammered, dropping to his knees to wipe the mess with his own velvet sleeve. The humors are unbalanced. The boy's inner wolf, it is too feral. It rejects the flesh. I have tried the silver-laced tinctures, the moonflower poultices. Nothing binds the spirit to the body." Ronan said nothing. He didn't even look at the groveling man. His pale, icy blue eyes were fixed on the massive four-poster bed in the center of the room. Bran was 6 years old. He looked like an ancient, mummified thing. The boy's chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged hitches. His skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over a cage of brittle bones. Deep, bruised black veins branched up his neck, pulsing weakly with poisoned blood. Bran let out a low, wet whimper. It wasn't the cry of a human child. It was the whine of a dying pup, trapped in the dark. "Get out." Ronan's voice was barely a whisper, yet it rattled the iron chandeliers overhead. The sheer density of his alpha command forced the air from Alden's lungs. "My king, please, if you allow me to bleed him once more." "I said, get out." Ronan stood. He was a mountain of a man, scarred and weathered, his broad shoulders draped in heavy direwolf pelts. The exhaustion radiating from him was a physical weight. "If you are not past the drawbridge by nightfall, I will let the courtyard hounds feast on your bones." Alden scrambled to his feet, abandoning half his tools, and fled the chamber. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the crackle of the hearth and the wet rattle of Bran's breathing. Ronan walked to the edge of the bed. He reached out with a massive, calloused hand, his knuckles white, and gently brushed a damp strand of hair from his son's forehead. The boy's skin was cold, clammy. A king was supposed to be a god among mortals. Ronan had slaughtered rival alphas with his bare hands. He had conquered the southern steppes and starved out the rebel packs in the jagged peaks of the west. He commanded armies. He hoarded mountains of gold and grain. Yet, he could not stop death from curling up at the foot of his son's bed. Footsteps echoed from the corridor. The door creaked open, and Eamon, the king's advisor in Beta, stepped inside. Eamon was an older wolf, his muzzle graying, his eyes heavy with cynical pragmatism. He looked at the bed, then at the floor where the medicine had spilled, and sighed. "Another failure," Eamon murmured. "He is drowning in his own body." "Eamon," Ronan rasped. The Alpha King did not show weakness, not to the pack, not to the generals. But here, in the shadows of the nursery, the cracks in his armor were wide and bleeding. The wolf is tearing him apart from the inside. I can feel the bond snapping. "The court is getting restless, Ronan," Eamon said, keeping his voice deliberately flat. The Beta knew the danger of pushing and grieving Alpha, but he had a job to do. The lords of the Vale are whispering. They see a weak king obsessed with a dying heir. They are starting to calculate succession. If Bran passes, Ronan interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, resonating with a terrifying, monstrous growl. "I will burn the Vale to the ground. I will leave no one alive to calculate anything." Eamon held his ground. You need to eat. You need to sleep. You have not shifted in 2 moons. You smell of decay. Leave me, Ronan. Leave me! The roar shook the dust from the ceiling beams. Outside the chamber, guards stepped back in fear. Eamon bowed his head slowly. He backed out of the room, leaving the Alpha King alone with his dying cub. Ronan collapsed back into the chair. He buried his face in his hands. The fire died down to glowing embers, casting long skeletal shadows across the tapestries. The pack did not care about a father's grief. They cared about the strength of the bloodline. Without an heir, the Iron Ridge would fall into civil war. But Ronan didn't care about the crown. He just wanted his boy to open his eyes. 3 floors below the stifling silence of the royal chambers, the scullery was a war zone of heat, grease, and screaming. Nora shoved her hands into the steaming vat of lye water. The heat seared the cuts on her knuckles, but she didn't flinch. You learn to ignore the pain quickly in the lower wards. Scrub those kettles until I can see my reflection in the iron, you worthless mutt, barked Mrs. Hale, the head housekeeper. The large, heavy-set Beta woman paced behind the row of washing tubs, cracking a wet towel against the stone floor for emphasis. Nora kept her head down. She dragged a stiff-bristled brush across the bottom of a massive stew pot, scraping away the burnt grease. Her back ached. Her knees, kneeling on the damp flagstones, were bruised a deep, mottled purple. She was an Omega. In the old texts, Omegas were written about with reverence. They were the peacemakers, the emotional anchors of the pack, the ones who could soothe the feral alpha and balance the pack's volatile energy. But the old ways were dead. Over the centuries, the packs had grown militarized. Strength was all that mattered. Alphas ruled. Betas fought and served. Omegas, smaller, physically weaker, lacking the aggression of their superiors, were relegated to the bottom of the hierarchy. They were the scavengers. The dirt beneath the pack's boots. Nora didn't mind the dirt. Dirt was honest. She was 20 years old, rail-thin, with a mess of dark hair tied back with a frayed piece of twine. Her clothes were a patchwork of discarded rags, stained with soot and bleach. She was hungry. She was always hungry. The Omegas ate last, which usually meant scraping the congealed fat from the bottom of the serving trays. "Nora!" Mrs. Hale's voice cut through the clamor of the kitchen. Nora dropped the brush and stood, wiping her raw hands on her apron. "Yes, Mrs. Hale. The healers in the upper wing have ruined another set of linens, blood and bile." The housekeeper sneered, wrinkling her nose. "Gather a fresh stack from the drawing room. Take them up to the prince's antechamber. And for the love of the gods, don't let the king see you. The man is looking for an excuse to snap someone's neck. Go in, drop the linens, and get out." Nora nodded. She didn't speak unless spoken to. It was a survival tactic. She walked to the drying room, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. She gathered a massive stack of bleached white linens. They smelled of harsh soap and winter air. The bundle was almost as big as she was, blocking her line of sight, but she knew the winding back staircases of the keep by heart. The climb was exhausting. Her calves burned with every step up the servant's spiral staircase. As she ascended past the second floor, the air in the stairwell began to change. The oppressive heat of the kitchens gave way to a chilling, biting cold. But it wasn't just the temperature, it was the scent. Nora paused on a landing, adjusting the heavy linens in her arms. She inhaled. Alpha distress. It was thick, suffocating. It rolled down the stone steps like an invisible fog of pine needles, frost, and sour panic. Any normal wolf would have submitted immediately, dropping to their knees, paralyzed by the sheer dominance of the sorrow. But Nora was an Omega. Her biology was built differently. Where betas and lesser alphas felt an urge to flee or submit to the heavy pheromones, Nora's chest tightened with a strange magnetic pull. Her instincts, buried under years of abuse and starvation, flared to life. Pack is hurting. Pack needs grounding. She shook her head, forcing the thought away. You are a scullery maid, she reminded herself bitterly. You are nothing. Do the job. Steal a crust of bread on the way down. Survive. She pushed open the heavy iron-wrought door leading to the royal corridor. The hallway was empty. The guards usually posted here had retreated down the hall, desperate to escape the king's crushing aura of despair. Nora walked softly toward the prince's antechamber. The double doors were slightly ajar. She slipped inside. The room was a disaster. Books were thrown across the floor. Vials of medicine lay shattered. A brazier had been knocked over, spilling gray ash onto a priceless Myrish rug. Nora approached the inner doorway leading to the bedroom. She intended to leave the linens on the threshold and run, but as she knelt to set the pile down, she heard it. A sharp, rattling gasp. Then, a terrifying silence. Nora peeked around the doorframe. The massive bedroom was empty of guards or healers. The Alpha King was not there. He must have stepped out to the adjoining balcony or the war room. In the center of the vast, shadowy room, the boy lay on the bed. His back was arched in a rigid, unnatural bridge. His jaw was locked tight. His eyes were rolled back, showing only the whites. He wasn't breathing. He was seizing, drowning in the disconnect between his human flesh and his wolf spirit. The wolf was tearing its way out, and it was going to kill the boy to do it. Nora stood frozen. She should run. If she was caught in here, she would be hanged from the battlements before dawn. The life of an Omega was worth less than a stable hound. Let him die, the cynical voice in her head whispered. They let your kind die in the winter cold every year. They let you starve. It's not your problem. Bran let out a choked, wet gurgle. A thin stream of black blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. Nora swore under her breath. She dropped the linens. She didn't think about the king. She didn't think about the executioner's block. She crossed the room in 3 rapid strides and threw herself onto the edge of the mattress. Up close, the stench of the boy's rotting aura was overwhelming. The healers had treated this as a physical sickness. They had tried to purge his stomach, bleed his veins, drug his mind. Idiots. It wasn't a sickness of the body. It was a shattered bond. The boy's wolf was terrified, thrashing blindly in the dark, attacking its own cage. Nora reached out. Her hands were rough, calloused, and stained with soot. She laid her palms flat against the boy's bare, frail chest. The moment her skin touched his, a shockwave of cold agony shot up Nora's arms. It felt like plunging her hands into a freezing river. The boy's pain was a physical current, frantic and destructive. The feral wolf inside him snapped at her presence, a rabid, dying thing guarding a cornered child. Nora closed her eyes. She didn't fight the pain. She absorbed it. Hush, she thought, pushing the intent down through her palms. This was the forgotten magic of the Omegas, not spells or glowing herbs. It was emotional alchemy. It was the ability to take the volatile, deadly energy of a predator and ground it into the earth. Nora leaned over the boy. She opened her mouth and began to hum. It wasn't a song. It was a low, guttural vibration that started deep in the bottom of her ribcage. A purr. To human ears, it was just a strange, rhythmic rumbling. But to a wolf, it was the sound of the den. It was the absolute, undeniable frequency of safety. It meant the hunt was over. It meant the pack was secure. The vibration traveled from Nora's chest, down her arms, and into Bran. The boy's rigid spine suddenly dropped. He hit the mattress with a heavy thud. Nora kept humming. The purr grew louder, filling the quiet space of the room, vibrating against the stone walls. Sweat broke out on her forehead. The boy's pain was heavy, trying to claw its way into her own heart, but she held firm. She imagined her energy as a heavy, warm blanket, wrapping around the frantic, snarling wolf inside the child's soul. You are safe, she projected silently. Sleep now. Beneath her palms, The frantic, erratic hammering of Bran's heart began to slow. Thump, thump, thump. The black, bruised veins on his neck, which had looked like dead tree branches, began to lighten. The stagnant, poisoned blood found its rhythm again. The wolf, finally exhausted and soothed by the Omega's anchor, curled up and went to sleep. Bran took a deep, shuddering breath. Then he exhaled a long, steady sigh. The color, faint but real, returned to his cheeks. For the first time in 6 months, the boy looked like a sleeping child, not a corpse waiting for a casket. Nora slumped forward, gasping for air. Her head spun. The transfer of energy had drained the little strength she had derived from her meager morning meal of watered-down oats. She leaned her forearms on the bed, her vision blurring at the edges. Step away from him. The voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It possessed the weight of an executioner's axe dropping onto a block. Nora froze. The blood drained from her face. She turned her head slowly. Standing in the doorway connecting the bedroom to the balcony was the Alpha King. Ronan looked like a god of war carved from ice. He was massive, his broad chest rising and falling heavily under his dark tunic. His hands were curled into fists at his sides. His eyes, usually a cold, dead blue, were flashing with the gold rings of a fully provoked alpha. He had walked in expecting to find his son dead. The silence had drawn him from the balcony. Instead, he found a filthy, ragged creature leaning over the heir to the throne. The scent of her filled his nose, not the sterile, sharp scent of a healer. She smelled of lye soap, wood smoke, sweat, and something else. Something terrifyingly sweet and deep. Nora's voice failed her. Her throat was bone dry. She scrambled backward off the bed, her bare feet hitting the stone floor. Protocol demanded she drop to her knees and bare her neck in total submission. But her legs wouldn't work properly. The exhaustion of the healing kept her rooted, swaying slightly, staring into the face of death. Ronan took a step forward. The floorboards groaned in protest. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice a low, vibrating growl that vibrated against Nora's teeth. "What have you given him? If you fed him some back-alley poison, I will flay you alive." Nora shrank back, hitting the edge of the nightstand. "Nothing. I gave him nothing, my king." "Liar!" Ronan closed the distance between them in 2 terrifying strides. He grabbed her by the shoulder of her tunic. His grip was like a steel vice. He hauled her effortlessly into the air, her bare toes dangling inches above the floor. Nora gasped, clawing weakly at his massive forearm. He was going to kill her, just snap her neck and throw her out the window. But as Ronan lifted her, ready to hurl her against the far wall, a sound stopped him dead in his tracks. "Father?" The word was weak, scratchy, and frail as spun glass. Ronan froze. His grip on Nora loosened, dropping her to the floor in a heap. He turned slowly toward the bed. Bran's eyes were open. They were no longer rolled back in agony. They were clear, bright blue, blinking slowly in the dim light of the room. He turned his head toward the towering man. "Father," Bran whispered again. "I'm thirsty." Ronan's breath hitched. The terrifying Alpha King, the warlord who had slaughtered hundreds without blinking, let out a choked, shattered sound. He fell to his knees beside the bed, his massive hands hovering over his son as if terrified the boy was a mirage. "Bran," Ronan choked out. He touched the boy's cheek. It was warm. The fever was gone. The smell of death, which had haunted this room for months, had vanished entirely. Ronan looked at his son's chest, watching it rise and fall in a steady, unbroken rhythm. Then, very slowly, the king turned his head to look back at the girl huddled on the floor. Nora was pressed against the stone wall, pulling her knees to her chest, her ragged clothes dusted with ash. She was trembling violently, her eyes wide with terror, expecting the blow to come. Ronan stared at her. He inhaled deeply, tasting the air, the scent of wood smoke, lye, and the undeniable, resonant calm of an Omega. 1,000 healers with titles, wealth, and magic had failed him. They had tortured his son with leeches and poisons. Yet this starving girl, smelling of the scullery, had walked into the room and done the impossible. "Who are you?" Ronan asked, his voice entirely stripped of its monstrous edge. It was barely a whisper. Nora pressed herself harder into the wall. She looked down at her bruised, calloused hands. "Nobody, my king," she whispered back. "I'm just the laundry maid." They moved her to the east wing. Nora hated it immediately. The bed was too soft, filled with goose down that swallowed her alive. The air smelled artificially sweet, thick with rosewater and beeswax. It lacked the sharp, honest dampness of the cellars. She sat in the center of the plush Myrish rug, her knees pulled to her chest, wearing a silk tunic that belonged to someone else. Beside her on a low table sat a silver platter piled high with roasted pheasant, heavily buttered bread, and sharp mountain cheese. She hadn't touched the meat. Instead, she had meticulously broken a single loaf of bread into small, hard pieces, wrapping them in a linen napkin and shoving them deep into the pockets of her borrowed trousers. Old habits died hard. The High Lords could give her a featherbed today, but she knew how the pack worked. When the boy was fully healed, she would be sent back to the lye tubs. Or worse. If the court found out an Omega had touched the royal bloodline, they might simply throw her in the river. The heavy oak door swung open without a knock. Ronan ducked his head to clear the frame. Even in a simple wool tunic and riding leathers, the Alpha King consumed the room. His presence was a physical pressure, displacing the air, making the hair on Nora's arms stand up. He stopped at the edge of the rug, looking down at her. He noted her position on the floor, ignoring the velvet chairs. He noted the missing bread. He noted the way her shoulders tightened, ready for a blow. "You are not eating," Ronan said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of the murderous rage from the day before, but still heavy with authority. "I ate, my king," Nora replied, keeping her eyes fixed on his mud-splattered boots. "You stole the bread and ignored the meat." Nora stiffened. She didn't offer an excuse. Excuses got you backhanded in the scullery. Ronan sighed. It was a heavy, exhausted sound. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the massive bed. The mattress groaned under his weight. "Look at me." Nora slowly raised her chin. The bags under Ronan's eyes were deep, bruising shadows. The warlord who had terrorized the southern steppes looked hollowed out, but the frantic, rotting scent of despair was gone. He smelled of rain, pine, and exhaustion. "Bran is sitting up," Ronan said. He drank a bowl of broth. "The healers, the new healers, say his vitals are completely stable. They say it is a miracle." "It isn't a miracle," Nora said flatly. The words slipped out before her survival instincts could stop them. Ronan's brows drew together. "Then what is it?" "It's biology," she muttered, regretting her tongue but unable to pull the words back. His wolf was terrified. You shoved bitter herbs down his throat and tried to bleed out a panic attack. He just needed to know the den was safe. Silence stretched between them. Nora braced herself. "You didn't speak to an Alpha King like that. You didn't call his methods stupid to his face." But Ronan didn't strike her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "The council wants to know what magic you used. Lord Harlan is whispering about witchcraft. He says you bound the boy's soul to a demon." Nora let out a short, cynical bark of a laugh. "Of course he does, because if a scullery Omega fixed what 1,000 beta healers couldn't, it means the natural order of your pack is a lie." Ronan's eyes flashed gold for a fraction of a second. "A warning. You tread on thin ice, little wolf." "I have lived on thin ice my entire life," Nora shot back, her fear momentarily eclipsed by the bitter reality of her existence. "Look at me. I weigh nothing. I own nothing. You dragged me up here to save your son, and I did. Now, tell me what you are going to do with me. Are you going to hang me to appease Lord Harlan? Or are you going to send me back to Mrs. Hale to scrub the grease traps until my hands bleed again?" Ronan stared at her. He was accustomed to deference. He was accustomed to terror. He was not accustomed to a starving girl demanding the terms of her own execution. "Neither," Ronan said quietly. Bran asks for you. Nora blinked. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a sudden sharp ache in her chest. The boy is traumatized, Ronan continued, looking away. He stared at the fire crackling in the hearth. When he sleeps, he shakes. When I try to approach him, he flinches. The king's voice cracked slightly on the last word. My own son fears my scent, my alpha nature. It is too harsh for him right now. He needs the anchor. Ronan stood up. He walked back to the door, pausing, with his hand on the iron latch. You will stay in this wing, he ordered, his tone slipping back into the rigid command of a military leader. You will eat the meat I provide. You will sit with the prince until his inner wolf is fully settled. In return, you will never see the scullery again. You will have gold, clothes, whatever you desire. I don't want gold, Nora said to his back. Ronan looked over his shoulder. Then what do you want? Nora looked down at her hands. The deep cuts from the lye water were still red and raw. I want a lock on my door, and I want to be left alone when the boy is asleep. Ronan's jaw tightened. It was a meager, pathetic request. It spoke volumes of the life she had lived under his roof. Done, he said, and walked out. 2 weeks passed. The winter storms battered the Iron Ridge, burying the castle in 6 feet of snow. Inside the royal wing, however, a strange, fragile thaw had begun. Nora spent her days in Bran's chamber. The boy was quiet, haunted by the months he spent trapped in his own failing body. He didn't want to play with the carved wooden knights the servants brought him. He didn't want to hear stories of great conquests. He just wanted Nora to sit by the fire and hum. She didn't coddle him. When he refused to eat, she didn't beg or plead like the beta nurses did. She simply took the bowl, ate a spoonful herself, and told him that if he wanted to starve, the hounds in the courtyard would be happy to take his portion. Bran would glare at her, then snatch the bowl and eat it out of spite. Nora understood survival. She taught Bran that survival wasn't always pretty, and it wasn't always brave. Sometimes it was just eating your porridge when it tasted like ash. Ronan watched from the periphery. He stood in the shadows of the antechamber, observing the Omega and the air. He watched Nora flinch when a log popped too loudly in the fire. He watched her meticulously check the exits whenever a guard walked past the door. She was a prey animal living in a den of apex predators. Yet, when Bran woke up screaming from a night terror, she didn't run. She would dive onto the bed, wrapping her frail arms around the thrashing boy, releasing that deep, vibrating purr that commanded the feral terror to submit. Ronan felt the pull. It was a primitive, undeniable instinct. An alpha's core was built for war, for expansion, for violence. But without an omega to ground that violence, an alpha eventually burned themselves out, taking their pack down with them. Ronan had been burning for years. He found himself lingering in the hallway just to catch her scent. He found his temper, usually a hair-trigger explosive thing, dulling into a manageable, focused calm. The pack noticed. He is weak. Lord Harlan slammed his fist on the heavy oak table in the war room. The council of betas and lesser alphas sat around the map, ignoring the painted wooden markers of their enemies. The king hasn't called for a hunt in a month. He sits in the nursery while the western rebels regroup. Aemon leaned against the stone wall, his face impassive. The king is securing his heir. Harlan. The king is bewitched, Harlan spat, his eyes flashing with aggressive amber light. By a filthy mutt from the kitchens. We all smell it on him, that cloying, weak scent of an omega. She is diluting his aggression. If the neighboring packs sense this vulnerability, they will march on the Iron Ridge by spring. Watch your tongue, Aemon warned quietly. I serve the strength of the pack, Harlan growled, standing up. I will not let a rat from the cellar bring down this dynasty. That night, the attack came. Nora was asleep in her locked room. The heavy iron bolt she had requested held strong, but it was no match for the steel-toed boots of 3 palace guards, loyal to Lord Harlan. The door splintered inward with a deafening crash. Nora bolted upright, the velvet blankets tangling around her legs. Survival instinct kicked in instantly. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She rolled off the opposite side of the bed, her bare feet hitting the cold floor, grabbing the heavy iron fire poker from the hearth. 3 massive men stepped into the room. Their eyes were glowing amber. Their teeth were elongated, pushed halfway into their wolf shifts. They weren't here to arrest her. They were here to tear her throat out and claim she attacked them. "Witch!" the lead guard snarled. Nora backed against the stone wall, raising the heavy iron poker. It shook in her grip. She was 90 pounds of bruised bone and cynical grit. They were armored killers. "Get out!" Nora rasped, her voice trembling but unbroken. The guards lunged. A roar shook the very foundation of the keep. It wasn't a human shout. It was the sound of a mountain collapsing. The air in the room instantly turned to lead. The sheer, crushing weight of the alpha dominance was so absolute that the stone walls seemed to crack under the pressure. Ronan stood in the ruined doorway. He wore no armor. He didn't have a sword, but his eyes were a blinding, terrifying, liquid gold. His jaw was fully shifted, thick and monstrous, his hands ending in brutal, black claws. The 3 guards hit the floor. They didn't fall. They were driven down by the biological command of their king. They slammed onto their knees, gagging, their hands clawing at their own throats, as Ronan's aura literally suffocated them. Ronan stepped into the room. He wasn't thinking as a king. He wasn't calculating political fallout. He was a beast whose den had been breached. He reached down, grabbing the lead guard by the steel collar of his armor, and hoisted the massive man into the air with one arm. He pulled his arm back, ready to drive his claws straight through the man's chest cavity. "Ronan!" The voice was sharp. It cut through the roaring bloodlust in his ears. Nora dropped the iron poker. It clattered loudly against the flagstones. She didn't cower against the wall. She didn't submit to the suffocating pressure of his alpha rage that was currently crushing the lungs of the guards. She walked straight into it. She crossed the room, stepping over the groveling men, and placed her small, scarred hands flat against Ronan's broad, heaving chest. "Look at me," Nora commanded. Not a whisper. A direct, unyielding demand. Ronan froze. His gold eyes, wild and bloodshot, snapped down to her. The beast inside him roared, demanding blood, demanding the execution of the threats. Nora didn't flinch. She opened her mouth and let out the deep, resonant purr. It hit Ronan like a physical wave. The vibration traveled from her palms, through his chest, and directly into his violently thrashing inner wolf. It was the anchor. It was the heavy, immovable iron chain wrapping around a runaway wagon. The den is safe, her presence projected. The hunt is over. Stop. Ronan's breathing hitched. The monstrous, shifted jaw slowly retracted. The black claws shrank back into his nail beds. The suffocating pressure in the room evaporated like mist, burned away by the sun. The guards on the floor gasped violently for air, curling into fetal positions, whimpering. Ronan looked down at Nora. She was pale, shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but she held her ground, her hands still flat against his chest. "If you kill them here, Harlan wins," she said quietly, her voice strictly practical. "He wants you to look like an out-of-control monster who slaughters his own guards. You put them in chains. You try them in the daylight. You let the pack see that you are the law, not a feral beast." Ronan stared at her. He realized, in that moment, that she was not just an anomaly. She wasn't just a nursemaid for his son. She was a queen. She possessed a strength he couldn't replicate with 1,000 broadswords. She possessed control. He reached up, gently wrapping his massive hand over her small, bruised ones resting on his chest. "Guards," Ronan bellowed. The corridor flooded with loyal soldiers, Eamon at the helm. The beta took one look at the splintered door, the whimpering assassins on the floor, and the Alpha King standing perfectly calm with the scullery maid. "Take them to the dungeons," Ronan ordered, his voice cold, steady, and entirely rational. "Arrest Lord Harlan for high treason. If he resists, break his legs." "Yes, my king," Aemon said, bowing deeply. He didn't miss the way Ronan stood entirely positioned between the door and the girl, shielding her with his body. When the room was cleared, and only the two of them remained in the shattered chamber, Ronan turned fully to Nora. "They will not stop," Ronan said. "Harlan is just one. The pack respects violence. They do not understand this." He gestured between the two of them. "Then you teach them," Nora said, stepping back to put distance between them, wiping her sweaty palms on her trousers. "Or you don't. It doesn't matter to me. Once Bran is fully grown, I'm leaving." Ronan let out a low, rough chuckle. It was a rusty sound. "You think I would ever let you leave?" "I am not a pet, Ronan," she warned, her eyes narrowing. She refused to use his title. "I know," he said, stepping forward. He didn't crowd her. He didn't try to dominate her space. He simply stood before her as an equal. "You are not a pet. You are not a maid. You are the anchor of the Iron Ridge. You fixed my son. You stopped my hand." He dropped to one knee. A king of the steppes, a warlord who had never bowed to gods or men, knelt on the cold stone floor amid the wreckage of the bedroom. He looked up at the cynical, starving girl, with dirt under her fingernails. "I do not offer you a cage," Ronan said softly, baring his own neck to her in the ultimate, unthinkable act of alpha submission. "I offer you the pack. Teach us how to survive the winter without tearing ourselves apart." Nora looked down at the massive, scarred man kneeling at her bare feet. She thought of the cold lye water. She thought of the hunger. She thought of Bran, sleeping peacefully down the hall. She let out a long, slow sigh. "Fine," Nora muttered, crossing her arms. "But I'm picking the new head housekeeper. Mrs. Hale is fired." Ronan smiled. It was a real human smile. "As you command." The Alpha King didn't need magic to save his son. He needed the grounded heart of someone who understood what it meant to survive the cold. Nora proved that true power isn't about the strength to destroy, but the quiet resilience to heal. If you loved this deep, human take on werewolf lore, smash that like button, share this story with your pack, and subscribe to the channel for more grounded, emotional audio dramas. See you in the next video.